Hey guys, I've got another card process video for you today. It's for this Gnomes birthday card. For more information, head over to my blog craftyepicurean.com. Okay, so the first step was to make a blended background, which I'm going to make using this distress ink in tumbled glass, this Stampin' Up pad and soft sky, and another distress ink in shaded lilac. So I'm going to be making a blue to violet type of blended background. I'm using these blending brushes I bought off AliExpress. Right, so I start off with shaded lilac as my dark colour. I'm going to go from the top of a piece of white cardstock and then blend them down into the progressively lighter shades of blues. So that's shaded lilac, and then tumbled glass, and then the soft sky from the Stampin' Up set. And I go back and overlap the colours to make sure they blend nicely. Now I've gone ahead and I've used this die cut as a stencil, so it's like a cloud die cut, and I'm just going to go over with the colours to give it a bit of a layered cloud look. So I'll just speed it up a little bit because it's a pretty simple technique, but it's very effective at giving a nice layered cloud look for a background, as you can see here. Now I just used it on the shaded lilac, but you can do it over the whole shaded background if you feel it would suit your card design. So I'm taking that background now, and I'm just going to grab some gnome die cuts that I've previously coloured and left in my crafty stash. And I've used another die cut here to cut out a piece of grassy background, which I'm going to overlay on top of the shaded blended background. Just using my scissors to cut off the excess. I'm just lining this up now and trying to figure out the design and the layout of the die cuts for this card. Now that I've decided on the general layout, I'm going to start sticking down my elements to this front note card. I'm going to use some double-sided tape to tape that grassy image down, or die cut down, just in the front there. I'm just going to do it on the bottom part of the die cut so that I can sort of overlap that grassy die cut on top of some of the other gnome themed die cuts. And you'll see me do that shortly once I've stuck this grassy background down. Just lining up the edges to where I want this grassy image to lay out. And as you can see, I didn't quite make it to the edge, but I'll just use my paper trimmer later on to trim that off, and I'm just using my scissors to cut off the overhang. Yep, so here I'm grabbing my guillotine where I will cut off the excess of that card. So that does make it slightly shorter, so this will make the card slightly shorter than an A6 standard card. But I don't mind, because when I do the card base later, I'll just make sure that there's a border around this front note card. Okay, time to stick down my gnome themed elements. So I've decided that I wanted some of those gnome themes to sit behind the grassy die cut in the foreground. To stick these down, I'm going to use my glue pen, which I'll link to my review on these glue pens I bought off AliExpress in the top right hand corner. But as you can see, I'm just putting some liquid glue, which is inside these glue pens, and then sticking them down where I want them to be placed. Just carefully lifting that front grassy bit so I can overlap it over those die cuts. And I use an acrylic block as a weight to sit on top of those die cuts, just to make sure that they stick in place while they dry. I mean, just to help them hold in place while they dry, because sometimes they can warp and lift up a little, and that little bit of extra weight helps. So I repeat that with the rest of the die cut elements, and as I place them down, I make sure I put the acrylic block on top. Next step is for my sentiment. I decided to try and use a sentiment from this stamp set. So I've got a happy birthday sentiment here that I'm just trying out to see what it looks like, but I do decide later on, as you'll see, that I decide against using that happy birthday sentiment and instead want to use this stamp set. So I take that sentiment from the other stamp set off and use this banner stamp and another from the same set which says birthday, and I place that on the grassy die cut which sits in the foreground. Just grabbing my acrylic block, and I'm going to be using Ranger Archival ink in jet black to stamp both of these parts of the sentiment. As you can see here, making sure I ink it up really well, because I'm only going to get one shot of this as I'm using an acrylic block. Usually I would use a stamping platform because it's more accurate using a stamping platform, and you can re-stamp if you make a mistake or you haven't inked properly or you haven't stamped quite so well. But I felt like I needed a bit of practice with my acrylic block skills today. Alright, and here I am stamping the birthday sentiment using the same Ranger Archival ink in jet black and the same acrylic block. In between, I've washed and removed the stamp. I just use a baby wipe to wash my stamps and then remove them from the acrylic book and put them back on the stamp set. So I'll just put that away. Now it's time to make this into a card. I've just grabbed a white card base using double-sided tape. This is slightly textured card base. Removing the release paper from the double-sided tape, and then I'm placing that front note card on top and pressing it down to make sure it adheres really well. So there's a little bit of overhang on there. I was going to try to have a little bit of a white border around that front note card, but it was so tiny that I decided against it, and now I'm just going to trim off the excess using my guillotine. And that's how I made this gnome's birthday card using these gnome themed die cuts I found in my crafty stash and a blended background. For more information, head over to my blog craftyepicurean.com, and thanks for watching.